Hello and welcome to another episode of the Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Bellotti, and I'm excited to have like a 4-time guest at this point, Guillaume Cabane. Guillaume, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Matt.
How's it going?
It's going great. It's good to be on the show once again.
Yeah, I am so excited to have you. For those of you that don't know, Guillaume is a master wizard of growth, one of the top people in the world. He's currently co-founder and general partner of HyperGrowth Partners, which is a growth advisory firm. I'm sure that you might have a better way to describe it. And G, well, I'm just going to call him G throughout this. He's worked here at Drift. He's an advisor, growth advisor to Ramp, CapChase. He's a Sequoia Scout, an angel investor. He's the VP of growth at a whole bunch of places, including Drift, Segment, Gorgeous, and others. He is one of the best people in the world at taking B2B companies from a few dozen million in ARR to a few hundred. Same thing with like people, right? Building scalable systems from scratch. And he switched over to advising full time. And today I am really excited to have G on because I want to zoom way out on growth. So this episode is not like a super tactical one, but more about like growth as a whole. So we're going to talk through a little bit of where growth has come from, where it is today, and where G sees it moving in the future. So the things that we expect out of growth in the next 5 to 10 years, things to look out for, trends that'll die that are happening today, and all that. G, that was a long intro. Is there anything you want to fill in about yourself before we jump in?
Yeah, for those who don't know what they're getting into, I just want to preface, I used to be Matt's manager. So there is some context here.
Yes. All right, that's the gap you want to fill in. Sounds
exactly. I mean, I think my biggest claim to success is to be able to work with people like Matt and, find them where they were in product. And Matt's come a long way. And I think my if I want to, lay rest to one thing is like I've been able to help people step foot into growth, many of them, and help them and train them and become amazing growth people. And Matt is definitely probably one of the best people I've been able to work with and like one of the best PMs. And I want to do that again and again and again. That is, for me, growing people for me has been more important than growing businesses.
That is amazing. I super appreciate that. And this podcast would not be a thing if you had not joined Drift. So I am very appreciative. All right, so let's jump into the topic. You've been doing growth for almost 10 years now. When you first got into it, what was the definition of growth? Like, what did the world of growth look like?
Yeah, it wasn't a thing. Like most people who have like that much experience were doing things similar to growth without knowing it was called growth. That's the reality. Like if you look at people like myself, like I used to be an entrepreneur, co-founder. I managed product teams and engineers, and I think like the marketing tools became more and more technical. Things like, for example, Segment, where I used to work before Drift, required engineering support. It required selling to the product team, engineering team. Why a marketer would want that, and why are they involved, right? And so raising the technical bar, the technical knowledge of marketers like myself enabled us to think more and more in terms of two things. One is the value of engineering in marketing. It's number one. And because we were not getting the resources, that's to be frank, the next thing happened. We started cutting corners, whether that's low code, no code, or whether that is like, say, lowering the effort required to get the answer we wanted. That is the start of growth, if you ask me. All of the experimentation that happened, all of the framework of hypothesis and effort and all of those things happened because we didn't have the resources. Because people would say, okay, I'll give you an engineer for 3 days, do what you can. I was like, oh, scratch my head, like 3 days. Let's make the most of that. Okay, and so which beforehand, I had used Zapier, whatever you want to let's say de-risk what I was going to have that engineer do. That is it. Eventually now it's different. But I think that's how it started, if you ask me.
And outside of tooling and like technical resourcing happening, I think that there's this perception that like growth became a thing because a lot of investors saw a couple growth stories at, a few other big rocket ships and then started pressuring their companies to say like, do this growth thing, like do the thing that I saw them do. How much do you think that that has played into like growth being a thing today?
Yeah, I think that's interesting, but it's probably a bit more recent. If you think of all of the PLG wave we're in, PLG is, what does it mean? It means free acquisition. Okay, why do we want free acquisition? Because the costs have gone up, and we can cover a bit of that. And you can trace that back to the stories of the Airbnb and Dropbox finding, say, their own like free acquisition strategies. Growth. There's if you go back enough, it's like growth hacking, all right? And so I in those two cases, it's finding some either a viral loop or a content generation, which Airbnb is great, but they could have gone another way, right? And that was for SEO purposes. And so it's in both cases they try to find a competitive moat to kickstart the engine and have that let's say lead gen machine. Seeing that, investors, I think they tried pushing for some of that, but it didn't really take off back then because there was no transformational change in the industry. It is different now, right? The investors said, "Hey, we want you to be doing growth," but like nothing changed in the industry. Like 99% of the marketers I was meeting were doing like paid and SEO and newsletters. Like we come from a dark like place. We come from a dark place. If you go back far enough, like marketers were doing like random blog posts for like SEO points, newsletters, right, on Pardot, and just paid on like Google. That was it. That was your job. So it was a grim, dark place.
And those, like you're saying, as a grim dark place. Do you think that those tactics have kind of faded out, or are they still very relevant today? It's just now a small piece of the tool belt.
I think they've changed significantly. Some of them have, and others have completely fallen out of fashion. Like I'll give you two examples. Like a newsletter that you send like once a month to your entire customer base. Same newsletter, like I don't know who does that these days. All right, that's a bad idea. A welcome sequence where the emails are like 1 out of 5, like, hey, welcome to Drift, 1 out of 5, and then 2 days later, like 2 out of 5, right? Like, yeah, we don't do that anymore.
And why are those a bad idea? Why don't people do them anymore?
Okay, that's because the users' expectations have changed. Okay, as marketers, we are trying to create the best experience possible before the product, or sometimes when you work on activation in the product. Okay, and as other companies find better ways to onboard, better ways to attract that are a better experience, users say, "Oh, that was delightful. That was really good." And then you go back on the website, you like, let's as close as possible to the DMV, and you're like, oh, that's tough, right? And so I think that's the truth. Like, you don't want to be the DMV, okay? And if you are the DMV, well, you should expect your conversion rates to be bad, okay? So do you want to be Gong, or do you want to be the DMV? Okay, you pick. And I think so. So the truth is, like, all of us, like, we're also users. All marketers are users of other products, and so we immediately identify a great experience, and we copy it. And so this entire like industry reacts and copies others. But just like in engineering and product, like you see a great framework, you see like or in design, you see some great designs of an app, and people copy it all the time. And that's what's going on.
And so people are kind of like copying strategies, but it sort of also sounds like the strategies have shifted to be more like personalized to the
Sure.
product or offering, and less like do this exact playbook, and more like take the playbook and make it work in our world.
The tools have changed to enable that. If you look at the platforms, I'd say, and the reason why I'm so much at the center is because I was lucky to be part of a couple platforms that enable that change. Whether that's a Segment or Drift. I was at the epicenter of that change during those critical years. You go back before Segment, it was extremely difficult to do those tactics. You had no good way of like syncing customer data across multiple different marketing platforms, right? And you had, you couldn't have an audience of, an audience of your users that was, a good, nice, homogeneous group that you could send ads to, and then 2 days later send an email to. This is almost impossible, right? And without even talking of personalization. So the technology has changed a lot, and that's where when you think of like growth and say the leaders versus the laggards in this market, I think the mistake that people make is to think, oh well, there's been that shift, that tectonic shift, and now marketers do growth, and it's settled. They don't. It's constant change. Like the technology is still changing and pretty much at the same rate. And if you stick to the Segment and the custom IO and the Drift and all of today, 2 days from now you are the laggard. Your conversion rate drops, reversion to the mean. You've got to keep pushing the envelope, be at the cutting edge all the time. And I think that is what I want to believe defines me. Is I just truly enjoy technology products, B2B SaaS products, and marketing platforms. I enjoy testing new ones. I'm the guy who's going to respond to like a random founder who's starting something that can do like a deep fake video to like impersonate SDRs and say, hey, let's try it. All right. Does it work right now? Not really, but there's a trend. I want to be sure I don't miss that trend.
Yeah, I mean, that's how Drift found you in the first place. You showed up and you were like, I'm going to twist and contort your product to try to do this
Absolutely.
new tactic.
Yeah, if I recall, when I was at Segment, I was Drift's first enterprise customer. So the first large customer to like put the chat and like start things that no one was doing back then, which is like put personalized data in the chat and like control the chat based on like dynamic scoring on the homepage and all that stuff. And some of that has become standard now. It's market standard. Like saying like, hey, welcome company name, and like having some scoring change the chat. That is like, it's standard, but like, yeah, that was a first. But that is how you create, let's say, a competitive moat. That's how you compete and win.
All right, so I think this segues pretty well into my next question, which is, let's talk about how like skill sets and skill set needs have changed, and are certain skills are more or less important today. Like, how do you think the needs of what a growth practitioner needs to have under their belt, what are those things today versus what were they before?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think there's a couple ways I could answer that. I think one way is that they haven't changed that much than a couple of years ago, in the sense that it's more and more technological, and it's more and more cross-channel. And so the best marketers are able to see the bricks of technology and how they can assemble them and say, well, there's this new advertising platform, whether that's metadata or something else. There's this new, maybe website experience you can create, personalize, and then there's this new onboarding thing. And like, how do I connect all of those things, and what kind of experience can I create that would be like so much better? Right? And knowing what exists in each of those silos, and what are the functionalities, the features, and how you can use the data from one to connect into the other, that is still true, and most people still don't do it, to be fair. There are things that are happening that are different, and I think that more and more there are tools and platforms that automate what marketers used to do, what growth people used to do. So you think of all of the knob turning that people on my teams used to do on paid, for example. Like we were looking, I remember this a couple of years ago, I had people who were looking at the results on paid from the previous day. Say, oh, like, CAC has gone up, or this campaign, like, turn the knobs a little bit. Like, let's adjust this down and the CPC a bit up, and like all those things. Like, that's automated now. Like, it's completely automated. Testing different messages for different audiences, like segmentation, like all automated too. So more and more, the marketers are, I think, like moving down like two paths. One is like the technology path, which is like slowly becoming more like marketing ops, if you want, of some sorts. And the other one is the creative people who like think of those experiences and create those experiences. Don't stay in the middle.
And when you're talking about this a little bit, that it's like some marketing ops, some creative type people. I think growth has continued to have like this semi-identity crisis of like, where does it live in an org?
Yep.
How should it be structured? Like, how do you think it's evolved to what it is today? And then maybe we can start to like use that to talk about some of the future.
Yeah, that I think is the failure of myself and all the people in growth is we have not been able to build this as a standard in the org chart of startups. That is a failure. By and far, growth is a random team that sometimes sits in product, sometimes in marketing. There's rarely a VP that reports to the CEO. It like sometimes like moves from one place to the other, and it's very hard to keep it as a group as a company grows. It's extremely hard. It overlaps too much on well-established teams. And so, especially with high growth companies, which is ironic, it's very hard to keep that group. However, it's super valuable to do so. So it depends whether there's enough buy-in from the founders to do it. But I think honestly, that's the failure of all of us in growth. There's not been enough standardization there. Think of like stuff like career ladders in engineering. Like, what are the career ladders in growth? Hell, I know. Yeah.
Right. They look kind of different at every place. Sometimes it's just sort of like modeled off the marketing one, modeled off the product one.
Yeah. I'll give you another one. Should engineers sit on the growth team and should they report to the head of growth? As many answers as companies I've talked to. All right. I've got my own answer, but like it's no better than anyone else.
Yeah. And how do you think that the identity of growth evolves over time? Because I think there's one argument that is like growth is fundamentally a set of tactics that will just like bleed into all of the ways that these other roles operate, or do you think that there is and should be a place for it as a standalone in the org?
I think the way I've come to realize it myself, I think the growth is extremely valuable during the teen years of a company. Okay, it's not valuable at the start. You need to do the basics. You don't have product market fit. You don't have marketers. You should just go and test your channels. All right, that's the first thing. And then you have that initial growth cycle, and then it kind of flattens out. Generally, around the Series A, you reach a couple million in revenue, and they start to flattens out. Okay, growth becomes extremely valuable. It's still a small company. There's not so much silos. You can talk to everybody. There's enough money. You can have resources, and you need to build like a competitive moat. And growth can take you from like those couple million to like 50, 70 million in revenue. After that, I'm seeing it is very rare that growth teams stay as growth teams. They tend to like silo off as growth squads or pods within like product, within marketing, and other things. Yeah, that's what I see. And I think that maybe is the truth, right? It's a way of working that is like high risk, high return, experimentation driven, looking for outliers. If you do a good job, like you founded your outliers like within a couple of years.
Right. And then it would seem like the cases where growth can and should exist as a standalone is going to be in very rare, like extremely high volume B2C type environments.
There are examples, like think of somebody like Atlassian. Like they have a super large product scope. They buy new products, or they launch new products, and so like every time they launch a new product line, the growth team needs to test 1,000 things, like how to onboard and how. And sure, they've got some truths, but they got to retest. So the experimentation framework is very valid because Atlassian is almost its own like VC, if you want. All right. Think of some companies that go international. Like I know growth teams that are tasked with like launching countries, right? But that is because you have lots of funds and you're starting something at the very early stage. So the same logic applies.
And you think that's a bad thing for the function of growth, or it just is purely like it is what it is, and everyone who operates in the growth world should know that their role is semi-transient to like the stage of product.
Yeah. I think it's a bad thing because it's hindering people from staying in growth and deploying that mindset more widely. I think the fault relies on senior growth people like myself who, to be honest, like a lot of the people from the early days have like semi-retired, right? Which is not true of people in product or engineering or other things, right? It worked well for us. We found great companies. We had lots of great equity, and boom, we're out. And so that seniority hasn't stayed. Okay, look at, for example, our friends from Reforge. Look at all the people who are like, the mentors of Reforge. Like, who still has a growth role in a company? Like, less than a third. And so, yeah, the function cannot exist without senior leaders wanting to, take the helm and say, yes, I'll be like the chief growth officer.
Right. And then just carry that forward and build it as like a core
in
standard.
larger companies. Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Fascinating. So let's talk about maybe some like growth type trends. Like today, product led growth is like the thing, right?
Yeah.
Back 10 years ago, it was growth hacking, like coming up with A/B testing and whatnot. Like that was the prevailing thing. How do you think of the next 10 years? Like what are the things that kind of fall off or maybe start to show up that people could start to think about, like maybe getting head on?
Yeah, and to give context, like 10 years is a very long time. If you look back 10 years, we're talking of 2012. I don't think any of the tools we're using, save maybe for HubSpot, was around in 2012. It didn't have no drift, no segment, no clearbit, no customer IO. Like none of those tools existed. Okay, for one. Second, the growth function did not exist either. And every marketer was looking at inbound marketing as a new way to like attract leads. So like 10 years from now, it has to be like radically different. Unless change stops, which I don't believe, it's going to be very, very different. This is a difficult exercise. I'd say it is likely that we have a combination of a lot more technology and a lot more AI eating things that we don't think can be automated. So text generation, like high quality text generation, is becoming more and more a thing. Like there's multiple well-funded startups that do that as a service. Contentfly is one of them, right? It's a good example. The same is true for all, let's say, marketing material, whether that's text, whether that's video, whether that's like images. If you saw the latest things from like our friends at OpenAI, they have this auto image generator where you just like do a sentence of text and it generates the image you want based on GPT-4. So like it's going to be a very different world. And so it's very likely that what we have between now and the next 10 years is marketing platforms that collect user data, automatically segment user data into buckets, test messages, copy imagery, videos, and the responses, and then find winners and just create content. And so, to put it bluntly, like machines will be creating content automatically for humans to consume in B2B as in B2C. And so when you think about that, it's going to change marketing teams dramatically. Right now, marketing teams are mostly, they produce marketing material. They produce strategies, tests, and marketing material. So my concern is not so much on growth, and we'll cover that. My concern is like, to my friends in traditional marketing teams, like, that career path is reaching its end, right? If your job is like split testing and like creating audiences and then testing messages, like, yeah, that's a risky path, I'd say. And most people don't realize that. What isn't, no one's working on it, so it's not automated and by and far. It's all of the infrastructure. So what do you connect, what do you implement, and how the data flows from one place to the other. And I think then like things that are out of the norm. So like the high creativity of like things that are completely out of the norm for now. But yeah, I think that's the change. I think marketing teams are slowly going to like dissipate.
Right, and A/B testing just happens on its own. You don't have to think about it.
It's already dead, man. A/B
Yeah,
testing's dead. Like look at like Optimizely. Like
yeah,
when have you heard of Optimizely lately? It's gone, man. It's gone. And the reason is like A/B testing was started in a world where a model for finding what works was random groups of population and finding the best average. And that's just gone. It's completely gone. Now we're like doing super targeted segments, and we're doing personalization tests down sometimes to the user, right? And we're not trying to find the best average. So that is like A/B testing is gone.
Okay, so let's say I'm a growth practitioner or a marketer listening to this. I'm like, all right, G is saying most of what I do today is going to be gone. Where can and should someone direct themselves if they want to like keep operating the world of growth and marketing? Is it what
Yeah,
you're saying? Is it
and they
just
should.
like
And they
is
should.
it just the creativity of like piecing the strategies together? Like, tell me about how people can think about that.
It's going to take years before all this becomes commonplace. And so you should be the person pushing the envelope, testing those approaches, testing those new technologies in. Right now, it's a piecemeal approach. All of what I said exists in a piecemeal approach. There are platforms for auto text. There are platforms for auto video. There are great platforms for personalization on your homepage. All of those things exist. They still are completely disconnected, and you need to like test and validate each of those. So I think that's the truth for now. Long term, you still are tasked with, let's say, finding finding the unusual answer, finding things that your competitors have not. I'll give you one example. That can always find a big win even in a very well-known channel. When you and I were at Drift, we worked on this like Facebook acquisition tactic, and back in 2018, like Facebook, for ads was already like a well-established platform. So like, there's no obvious win to be had. Like you do ads or you don't, right? Sure, you can optimize them, but it's not like there's a 10x, right? And what we identified is that the Facebook platform was not receiving, there's not set up to receive B2B conversion data well, because like those are offline conversions and the CRM can't sync back to Facebook properly, and the match rate on business emails is low, and there's a host of things that mean that Facebook wasn't learning what was a good lead to Drift or not. We identified that, and we found a workaround by like faking an e-commerce conversion from the homepage based on the company size and a couple of other heuristics, right, and a lead scoring model, right, which brought us like significant lift. That, and for a very long time, that's human thinking. Okay, somebody has to find that flaw. That brings us back to the initial days of like growth hacking. You're looking for a flaw. You're looking for something that nobody has tried. A blocker, something that saying this doesn't work. It's like, what could we do to make it work? Okay, whether that's a technological flaw or that's a human flaw. I'll give you another example. Okay, so you say like, well, okay, machines are going to create text. Sure, possible, already doable. some of the best outbound campaigns I have run are like faking the impression that this is done from a human, sent by a human, sometimes with like some fake forwards or some like advanced, let's say, combination of events. Because I'm a human, I can think like a human, and I can say, hey, this looks human, this feels human. And so one of the best ones, I'll give you the example, is we impersonate the CEO sending an email to their sales rep, and the sales rep forwards that email to the prospect saying, hey, I'm just doing my job. The boss asked me to reach out. Our response rates on this kind of emails is multiple times higher than on others. Why? Because on the receiving end, it feels natural, and you feel bad for the poor human saying, hey, well, boss asked me to send you an email, so like I'm doing that. Nothing feels more human than that. All right, that like boss to salesperson relationship is extremely human. That is a thinking that for now is reserved to us humans, I have to say.
Right. Finding ways to like connect to this must have been a person.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking it through. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the finding flaws in the system. It's really, it's like exploiting the opportunity that no one else has gotten yet, because as soon as someone exploits it, then everyone else tries to, and then it starts to die
For
off
sure.
as a channel.
Give you another example that's finding flaws that cannot be automated. All of what we said is about personalization and adding more personalized insights into the communication, whether it's email or whatnot that you're sending to valuable companies' prospects. Most of the companies I talk to these days as an advisor come to me and say, well, what you say on keynotes, gee, is fantastic, but it doesn't apply to us. We just can't have that data because we are in fintech or whatever, right? And that data does not exist. We can't buy it. Okay. And I say, well, let's create it. Let's manually, let's do what it takes, because if no one has it, then it is very competitive. It's extremely competitive, right? And so, for example, I just worked with a fintech company that needed to that sells only to SaaS businesses, and we need to know whether they have like a monthly subscription. And we didn't find any data vendor that told us that. We have a SaaS flag, but it's not super reliable, and we don't know like what kind of subscriptions they actually have. Well, we built a scraper. The scraper goes to the pricing page and looks for the /month or per month, right? And we scrape hundreds of thousands of websites per month. That has given us a competitive moat. Looking into what data is missing and say, well, that should be easy to scrape, right? That is leveraging a flaw. A lot of things are like that. So if you look into like, well, what is G doing? G is always looking for those let's say, those missed opportunities at what everyone overlooks and say, this is impossible. We don't have this. We can't do it. I'm like, well, what if we could?
Do you think it's almost as simple as that, of just like of making sure to challenge yourself and your team to say, what if we could? Like, or is there more to it? Or is it really just like use that as the starting point and then just hold on to it?
That's my starting point. And then the framework is very experimental driven. We have lots of like a hypothesis approach. We are very like serious about how we think through it. Absolutely. We test it, we de-risk it, we try to go fast, we reduce costs. But most of the wins I've had over the past 10 years are just pushing something where the market had accepted that it was not possible, or just nobody thought about it. So people accepted a lower, worse version of the experience.
And when you think about the next, 5-10 years, and people are listening to this and they're practitioners and they want to stay ahead of the curve, what can you tell people to look out for to know that like this channel isn't going to work anymore, or like this channel is dying, or like this tactic is dying? Are there like very obvious signals to you that can tell someone like it's time to shift our strategy?
Interesting. I think that channels, strategies like come and go. So it's just like in SaaS is this great wave of bundling and unbundling. All right, and the same thing happens in marketing. All right, is like everybody overuses a tactic, it dies off, and then somebody finds a way to restart it in a different way, and boom, it works again. So I don't know that I have a good answer to like how to predict that something is not working anymore. I can say look at data on a company per company basis when we try 10, 15 different things on that channel and nothing works out. I'm like, well, okay, let's move off to something else. Okay. And when I look also like one way, but I'd say most people don't have access to that. Like because I work with like many companies, I look at the distribution of conversion rates on different channels and different tactics. And I can slowly see them like slowly getting closer and closer. And no one like pops out. I'm like, well, it seems to be obvious that, we've reached a consensus.
Right. The best way to use a channel has been figured out. Enough copy pasting has happened that it just is what it is. As long as you hit that benchmark, you should like set it there and then go on to the next thing.
Absolutely.
Cool. Well, gee, I feel like, we could keep going, but we got to wrap this at some point. Are there any other things that you want to make sure that you kind of share or talk through before we call it a wrap here?
Yeah, I think that the experimental approach, hypothesis-driven approach, is valid not just in trying to find leads. I think it's important to realize that the best companies I work with have identified that and say, well, what if we applied that to other parts of our business? Okay. And I, for one, apply the same approach to my personal life. Okay. I have found that it is extremely valuable to be able to de-risk, lower the cost of finding out whether something has merit or doesn't. Being able to think differently, go very wide, and have very crazy approaches to solving like one's life problems. How do you hack the system? And then every day I have crazy ideas. And I'll leave you with one, which I've been tinkering for a couple of months. I've been thinking of a way to hack airline yield management systems because in this day and age with COVID, most airlines have free reimbursement, unlimited reimbursement over a couple of months. And so I've been thinking that maybe I could buy off all the business seats on a Paris to New York flight, drop them the day before the flight, and buy off one back because the yield management should react and should drop the prices, crater the prices to like get people back on. So that's the kind of thinking I have. There's lots of reasons why not to do it, but still, there's something in me is like, this is an exciting idea. How will the yield management system react? Right? So that's how I think.
Absolutely incredible. And that is what makes G one of the best growth people in the world, always thinking about this crazy stuff, looking for ways to make something work when there's just like a small thing to leverage. It has been such a pleasure to learn from you, work with you. Thank you again for teaching me so much, helping me get this podcast started back in the day. It has been amazing to work with you, learn from you, hear from you, and thanks so much for being a guest again.
Thanks for having me again, Matt. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. So, folks, thank you so much for listening. If you like this episode, check out all the others. There's about 90 others with amazing experts. I think there's like 3 or 4 other ones with G. Those are fun episodes to check out as well. You can find me on Twitter at Matt Bellotti. If you have any feedback, thoughts, anything like that, feel free to reach out to me there. Thank you so much for listening. I know there are so many things you could spend your time on, listening to, working on, watching, consuming, whatever it is, and you're spending it here listening to the podcast, and I will be forever grateful. So thank you so much, and I'll catch you on the next episode. Bye.